All right, appreciate y'all being here tonight. We're continuing our study of social media and the Christian, and it's called Dangerous Playground because social media is a dangerous playground. It's not a class on throwing your phone away or deleting all your social media accounts, but we are talking about some dangers there and some Christian principles that will help us navigate those online platforms safely, ethically, and as Christ would. And there's a lot to study. We're in a portion of the study that has to do with relationships. Last week we talked about friends and the concept of friendship, how social media has impacted that and changed that. Tonight we're going to talk about the subject of cyberbullying. You've probably heard that now. It's a well-circulated term in our society, unfortunately because it's so prevalent. And I'm updating my numbers since the last time I taught this, and so I was looking, and I found these stats from, I believe, 2022, which is some time ago, but I think they're representative of what it's like today. And so this is the percentage of teens who say they have ever experienced any of these things when online or using their cell phone. So 46%, nearly half of all teenagers say they have experienced at least one type of cyberbullying. And what that is, we're going to give some examples on this chart. So the majority of this group that have experienced this saw it in the form of offensive name calling. Just people calling them names, hurting their feelings. And then 22% said they've had false rumors spread about them. 17% received explicit images they did not ask for. 15% constantly were asked where they were, what they're doing, who they're with by someone other than a parent. We'll be talking later in the quarter about physical health. And you think, what does physical health have to do with social media? Or you might say, well, he's going to talk about how our kids aren't getting enough exercise because they're always on their phones. And we will talk about that. But there's also physical dangers as kids are going online and interacting with people they think are their age, who are not their age, who are trying to hurt them. And so that's a problem. And you can see 15% of these kids surveyed said that has been a problem with them. 10% have received physical threats, and 7% have had explicit images of them shared without their consent, which happens a lot on bad apps like Snapchat, where you think your image is going to disappear, but no image ever truly disappears. Just get it out of your mind that you can delete anything that's been up on the internet. If it's on the internet, it's there. Maybe people with a lot of money can scrub something from the internet, but I don't think any of us are that savvy or rich. So it's a good rule of thumb to just say, if I'm going to have to delete this and erase it, and I don't want anybody to see it, I better not put it online to begin with. I want to give you a few examples, recent examples of cyberbullying. This one comes from Raleigh, North Carolina. The headline says, court records show cyberbullying of a Raleigh teen linked to false threats at Athens Drive High School. We just went through some common examples of cyberbullying, like name calling. Here's one that maybe you haven't heard of before, and it shows you how clever these bullies can be and how hard they work at agitating others and doing this anonymously. So the article says, a Raleigh student who refused an online chat demand to harm himself became the target of quote-unquote swatting and other threats. Now, when I was a kid, swatting is your mom would smack you on the bottom for something that you did, or, killing a fly. But these days, swatting is something different. Although some of you may have heard that term before, and it'll be explained in this article. So this student was being persuaded to hurt himself. And of course, he refused to do it, and so he was swatted and threatened in other ways. The article continues. New court records obtained by ABC 11 connect multiple fake shooting threats at Athens Drive High School in Raleigh to a dark and dangerous online world. The investigation into why and who is behind the bogus threat continues, but police say it could be linked to a bigger problem. Raleigh police said it all started from an online chat. According to police, it began in July when a juvenile student was unwillingly added to a group chat on the online platform Discord. I'm not that familiar with Discord, but you can add it to the list of social media apps. It's a messaging platform that in the beginning was used mostly by gamers, and now it's being used by more kids. And as a side note, I'll tell you parents, check your kids' phones out every once in a while and see what apps they're using to message people. And do it randomly. Don't give them a heads up, hey, when you get home from school, remember we got an appointment to look at your phone, because they'll get that cleaned up real quick. Just randomly, I got this idea from Jason actually, just randomly in the middle of the day or when they're not expecting it, say, hey, I need to look at your phone, and see what they're using to interact with others and be snoopy. It's important that we know what's going on, especially when they're first learning to use this technology. There's 150 million users on Discord now, and a lot of us have never heard of it, so you can see how quickly things change. So back to the story, the Raleigh Police Department said a user identified as Krill told the student to harm himself, and the user threatened to share the teen's private information and tell police that a violent crime was happening at the teen's home if the student did not comply. Once the student refused, Krill then started swatting the student, a form of illegal bullying behavior. Swatting is a slang term to refer to the intentionally false report of imminent violence at a residence, business, or school to harass and or endanger a specific person and or location through a large police and or emergency service response. Court documents show that on July the 12th, Raleigh Police Department responded to the teen's home after an online pizza order was submitted to a Pizza Hut with the message, "Help, he has a gun, send help." And so they did it this way to preserve their anonymity. It turned out to be a false alarm. Days later, on July 18th, the police department was again called to the home after a second false report of violence. Fast forward to September the 10th, the police received a report of an active shooter at Athens Drive. That was reported by Domino's Pizza on Western Boulevard after the delivery instructions said there was a shooter at the school. None of the threats turned out to be credible. Instead, there were efforts to harass the student. And so calling the police to someone's home anonymously and as a false threat is swatting. And would you ever think bullies would be that clever? But this is an ingenious thing they're doing, a wicked thing they're doing to harass students. As far as we know, that student, who of course his identity is protected in the article, has not come to harm, but he is having to deal with this as an ongoing situation. Others are not so fortunate. So this next article, Alamo Heights student was a victim of bullying before committing suicide, family says. This is a story that got quite a bit of media attention. It happened in the San Antonio, Texas area. A San Antonio family in Alamo Heights community are grieving the loss of their 16-year-old son, younger brother and classmate, who committed suicide as a result of suffering prolonged bullying, his family said. David Molak was a sophomore and Eagle Scout, avid Spurs fan, fitness enthusiast, and since October had been the target of bullying at Alamo Heights High School. His brother, Cliff Molak, told the paper in a phone interview. Now, the reason I picked this is because Cliff, David's brother, after his death, said something that I think sums up the problem really well. And I wanted to read you what he posted on Facebook. This is the brother of the young man who committed suicide after being bullied. He said, "In today's age, bullies don't push you into lockers. They don't tell their victims to meet them behind the school's dumpster after class. They cower behind usernames and fake profiles from miles away, constantly berating and abusing good, innocent people." I think he summed up the problem really well. And of course, he knew it all too personally, all too well, and you can hear his heartbreak in that. A young life snuffed out for no reason, just because of meanness. These online tools we have make it easier to do this kind of damage. And so we need to talk about it tonight. It's a problem that we need to discuss. I never heard, this is another social media platform I never heard of, People, P-E-E-P-L-E, which I think it's like playing on the word sheep, but also peeping at people, which is really creepy. Don't look for it. It got taken offline because what it amounts to is Yelp for people. You know, Yelp is an online platform where you can do reviews on restaurants or places of business and give them 1 to 5 stars. Well, People was something where you might not even be on it, but you might have a profile on there where people are rating you as a human being, a 1 to 5. I don't know who came up with this idea, but it's an awful idea. It's terrible to think that you can rate people this way. But that lasted for a little while, and then through public outrage, it was taken down, and thankfully it's not a part of the internet anymore. But there are things like it, and all of it's about the meanness of bullying. So let's talk about for a few minutes what's wrong with bullying, whether it's cyberbullying online or just bullying or being mean and unkind in real life. The problems are the same. What does the Bible say about it? Well, number one, bullies see victims as objects and not as human beings. They're a thing that the bully can use to get attention or to look strong or to look smarter or to just have some sadistic fun. They don't see the other person as a human being made in the image of God. Number two, bullying is hatred, not love. And this is an age-old problem. I'm going to turn over to Titus. And one of these lists that Paul gives, he gives a lot of lists of sins. And this is one of them, where he's talking about how they once were before they had Christ. And in Titus 3, verse 3, he says, "We ourselves were once foolish, disobedient, led astray, slaves to various passions and pleasures, passing our days in malice and envy, hated by others and hating one another." I think that's what bullies are, hated by others and hating one another. Julie and I use this phrase all the time, hurt people hurt people. Ever heard that? I like that because it's true. You're hated, so you turn the hate on other people. That's a lot of what bullies are doing. It's all about hatred. And of course, as Christians, we follow a new commandment, to love one another, even as Christ has loved us. We're not to be involved in anger and hatred. Bullies use unkind words to exert power over others. Let's turn over to Proverbs 11. I think we looked at this last week or in recent lessons, but I want to look at it again. Proverbs chapter 11, beginning in verse 12. "Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense." That's what bullying is. You belittle your neighbor, your brother or sister in Christ. "Whoever belittles his neighbor lacks sense, but a man of understanding remains silent. Whoever goes about slandering reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy in spirit keeps a thing covered." It may be true, but you don't have to say it. You may not need to say it. And we'll talk about slander more in a moment. Next, bullying is an abuse of power. It's usually someone who at least thinks they're stronger, persecuting someone who thinks they are weaker, superior over the inferior. Now, I say they think it because I'm not so sure that that's actually the case in bullying. But I want to look over at Romans to what strong people ought to be doing. Romans 15, verse 1. "We who are strong," Paul's including him in this, and this is strong in the faith, not physically strong, but we who are strong have an obligation to bear with the failings of the weak and not to please ourselves. God gives you strength to help those who are weak, to pull them up, to help them out, to pick them up. And that gift is important for that reason. And of course, bullies are just abusing that power. And then next, it's a violation, of course, of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I don't know a bully who enjoys being bullied. You know, I know people that like to get picked on and they dish it out and they can take it. My dad is one of those people. I know Dad has made several moves, and every church he goes to, when I go to that church, there's a crowd of teenagers and college students who follow him around making fun of him all the time. And he just laughs and he picks at them too. That's different. Bullying is malicious and hateful. And bullies don't want it done to them. And we all know the type, right? A person who can dish it out, but they can't take it. Bullying is slander. Let's go over to James 4. It involves saying things to people, saying things about people that maybe they're true, but they're not necessarily necessary if they are true. Listen to words of James here. Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? And what is your role? Are you judge, jury, and executioner? That's God's role. That's where He sits. And He's qualified because He has knowledge of our hearts and He knows everything about us. But we are not to speak evil against one another, but to love one another. So those are some things, and you could, of course, come up with other things. Is there anything anybody was thinking that they wanted to add to this list of what's wrong with bullying? I'm sure I've missed some things. Well, let's talk about how we could stop it. And these points, I've struggled with them a little bit because I was thinking about my audience, and a lot of us are concerned about our kids. And so some of these are about how you can help people who are being bullied, and some of them are, if you're the target, what you can do about it. The first, and I think most important thing to think about is this. It takes a victim to make a bully. And Jesus is such a good example here. And I want to look at all these passages about how Christ handled bullies and took their power away from them, starting in the prophecy of Isaiah 53. We're familiar with this. We read it a lot before the Lord's Supper. And I don't think there can be any doubt that Isaiah was prophesying about Jesus and the trials that He went through and, of course, His death on the cross. He's the man of sorrows. Verse 3, Isaiah 53, verse 4 says, He's borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with His stripes we are healed. That's familiar, right? You remember His trials. Well, compare that with the picture Isaiah gives us in verse 7. He was oppressed and He was afflicted, yet He opened not His mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shearers is silent. So He opened not His mouth. And that's exactly what Christ did when the bullies came after Him. Let's look at one example in Matthew 27. Verses 13 and 14. Well, let's start reading in verse 11. This is Jesus before Pilate. He stood before the governor, and the governor asked Him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus said, You have said so. But when He was accused by the chief priests and elders, He gave no answer. Then Pilate said to Him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But He gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now, why was he amazed? What did he see different in Jesus? He couldn't be bullied. He didn't get defensive. Our natural reaction is to defend ourselves and to fight and to cry out against our accusers, especially when we're innocent. And he sat there like a lamb before its shearers, silent, said nothing. And it just made them angrier because he took their power away from them. Well, let's go to John 18. I was going to skip it, but when I flipped in my Bible, it went straight to John 18. So that's telling me something. I better read it. John 18:22. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand. Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? And then he was sent bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Even when he was being hit in the face, he was able to maintain his composure and not give them what they craved, which was a victim. He wasn't going to be a victim. I want to go over to 1 Peter also. I think it's so essential if we're trying to rid the world of bullies to look at the example of Christ. Because it's the biggest bully failure in history. And so 1 Peter 2 is Peter who saw all of this. Remember, he and John were following Jesus closely through these trials, and he witnessed firsthand that slap on the face. And he heard the accusations that were false, and he saw Jesus stand there and take it without saying a word. He saw the amazement on Pontius Pilate's face. And so that's the eyewitness who's writing these words in 1 Peter 2, beginning of verse 18. He's speaking to servants here. Be subject to your masters with all respect, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the unjust. For this is a gracious thing when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure, this is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. So here Peter is thinking about the prophecy of Isaiah that we read a moment ago, and he's quoting it at the end of that passage I just read, at the end of verse 24. But when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten. Of all people on earth, Jesus had more power than anybody else to be a threat. He could have been a serious threat to those people who were accusing him. But he restrained his power. He held back the angels that he had at his disposal. And he allowed weak bullies to beat him and kill him on the cross. But he took their power away. So you don't have to be a victim. Now, for some reason in society today, it's become popular to be a victim. I don't know if you've noticed this. I see it all the time. People want the attention they get from being a victim. They like to list their grievances on social media, put out videos about how much they've been harmed and hurt and how unsafe they feel. But all that does is empower the bullies. There's no dignity in that, no strength in that. Follow Jesus' example, and you won't change overnight, but you'll learn how to control these people that are controlling you. I spent a lot of time on that one, but there are other things we can talk about. So another way to stop bullying, and this is more for parents who are trying to help. What do you look out for? Learn how to identify it. Not every mean word is bullying. Not every altercation or confrontation is a form of bullying. Michelle Borba, in her book Unselfie, defined it this way with the acronym CAP. She said, bullying is these three things. Bully is repeated cruel behavior, but it's also never accidental, and the P stands for power. Bullying is a power imbalance, which we were just talking about. Bullies at least appear to be strong. So she says, and I think she's onto something here, this is a pretty good definition. It takes those three things: cruel, not accidental, there needs to be intent behind it, and a power imbalance. Say an employer over an employee, or a coach over an athlete, or just a bigger kid at school at the playground than a smaller kid. But those things, now other things may be cruel, but accidental. That's not bullying. Or it may be cruel, but there's no power imbalance. Bullying requires these three things by definition. Now, cyberbullying is a different thing than real-life bullying. So what makes it cyberbullying? Well, we're talking about things online, obviously, but the online part of that adds these three things. It makes it persistent, you have greater access, it's quicker, it's easier to do, and so it can be going on night and day for months and maybe even years. It's permanent. Remember what I said before, you never really delete anything. When it's out there, it's archived, people can go back to it. This has been a problem with some YouTube videos that have been very hurtful. Maybe they weren't intentionally hurtful in the beginning, but a kid doing something goofy, and then years go by and this kid grows up and doesn't want to be remembered for that goofy thing he did in the YouTube video a long time ago, but it's still out there and people are still talking about it. It's also, at the same time of being online and accessible by peers, it's hard for parents to notice. You're busy, you're working, and we talked about Discord and other apps that you may not even know exist, that your kids may be on. That's why I say get their phones and look at it and find out what's going on, because you could catch something before it goes too far. So learn how to identify it. Number 3, we're going to talk about this for a while because I think empathy is a big part of how to prevent bullying and to treat it. And it's an important Christian principle for us to follow anyway. Develop empathy for others. What does empathy mean?
Putting yourself in the other person's place.
Yeah, just putting yourself in the other person's place. It's just about understanding the other person or feeling what the other person feels. That's empathy. And it can be hard to develop for some people. I think some people are natural empaths. Just by their personality, they feel what other people are feeling, and then other people have to work at it. But it's a Christian principle that we need to work at. I like Paul's take on empathy in 2 Corinthians 1, where he kind of talks about an earned empathy. Through your sufferings, you earn empathy toward others. Here's what he says, 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we may be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. A lot of comforts in those two verses, but you understand what he's saying. When we get through things, we have a special perspective that we can share with others to help them. Battling cancer is a good example. I see that happen around here all the time. Those of you who've been through it, when one of our members is diagnosed with cancer, you'll go to them and say, hey, I'm here. I know what you've been through. I've been through chemotherapy. I've been through the surgeries. I can tell you all about it. And that's someone that a person going through a hard time wants to talk to. Those of you who lost spouses, you're an invaluable resource to people who are grieving, going through that loss for the first time. And that's what Paul is talking about. That's earned empathy. And really, all empathy is earned. You have to train yourself to do this. So, Tim, you'll like this. I love this book, Winning with People by John Maxwell. And Maxwell, he likes to have principles for different things. You might be familiar with his book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. 21 laws. Well, this book is organized kind of like that. in terms of principles for human relationships. And his principle that I equate with empathy is the exchange principle. And it says, instead of putting others in their place, we must put ourselves in their place, which I think was Tim's definition of empathy, putting yourself in the other person's place. So instead of putting others in their place, telling them, what's wrong with them, we must put ourselves in their place. He says we naturally do not see ourselves and others from the same perspective. We're easy on ourselves and we're rough on other people. We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt and we judge others critically. This is what Jesus was talking about in Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not that you be not judged. You should judge others the way you judge yourself. You should be harder on yourself than other people. Give people the benefit of the doubt. In the book, he gives these suggestions for developing empathy, and I think they're pretty good. Leave your place and visit their place. Get out of your head and try to put yourself in their shoes. Don't just look at it from your perspective. Turn it around and see it through their eyes. Try it. Use your imagination. Number 2, acknowledge that the other person has a valid viewpoint. Now, you can't always do that. I was thinking about this one this morning, and I wondered, sometimes people are just wrong, right? So there are some viewpoints that aren't valid, but you can start out by looking for the validity behind that viewpoint and really seriously seek to understand the other person. And we don't all have to think the same way. Are there going to be differences of opinion? Always. Always. And a lot of times we have to agree to disagree. That's okay. But that doesn't mean that you're always right and the other person is always wrong. Sometimes it's not about right and wrong. It's just about two different ways of thinking. Check your attitude. Are you being prideful? Are you being arrogant? Are you being hateful? Are you filled with anger? Are you judgmental? Are you insecure? Do you have the mind of Christ? Are there some things you need to work on that may be causing this lack of empathy toward other people? And ask others what they would do in your situation. You can't read minds. So the idea here is if I want to understand you, we need to have a conversation, and I need to ask you, if you were me, what would you do? And sometimes that's all it takes to get empathy. Okay, 5 minutes, a couple more things. How can I stop bullying? Well, here's something that bullies need to take to heart. Like I said, these suggestions are kind of all over the place in terms of point of view. Some of them are for parents, some of them are for people being bullied, and this one's for the bully. You don't address your conflict in the public forum, like social media. You take it privately. You take a person aside privately. And this is the biblical procedure for handling misunderstandings and conflict. Matthew 18, 15 through 20. If your brother sins against you, take him aside, go to him in private, tell him his sin. If he listens, you've gained your brother. Jesus says, if he doesn't listen, go to him a second time with 2 or 3 witnesses. Have the conversation. If he listens, you gain your brother. If he doesn't listen, tell it to the church, get the group involved. If that doesn't work, withdraw from it. But you start with that private conversation. I don't know why it is that people think church discipline is simply kicking somebody out of the church. That's not church discipline. Or they might even have a little more sophisticated language than that and say, well, church discipline is where you withdraw fellowship from somebody. That's the last resort of church discipline, but it starts with a one-on-one conversation. And 9 times out of 10, that's where it also ends. Because most of the Lord's people are reasonable people. And we can talk, we should be able to talk to one another if we're living the Christian life and we have the mind of Christ. And then finally, just turn it around. In other words, instead of being a bully, be an encourager. This is one of the reasons I would never, use this class to try to talk you into deleting your social media accounts. If you do that, that might be good for you. But there are good things you can do on social media. You're connected to so many people virtually. You can send them encouragement and comfort. You can console them. You can respond to what they're going through. And you can do this all over the world. And so get in the habit of using it for encouragement instead of tearing people down and bullying people. Anything anybody wants to add to these thoughts on the problem of cyberbullying, conflict online? That's our last study on relationships. We're going to shift into health, and I think we've got enough time to cover physical health, spiritual health, and mental health online. Then we're going to end with a class on good practices on social media. So that's it for tonight. Appreciate your attention.